I wish everyone very warm good afternoon. So today we have all again gathered here for this webinar, which has been a series of webinars which have been converted into a course on gender and development, jointly being organized by Bharatdasan University Entrepreneurship Innovation Career Hub and the Department of Women Studies of Bharatdasan University. So on my behalf and on behalf of Bharatdasan University, I extend a warm welcome to Dr. Prasanna Venkatesan, my good friend, right now working at International Finance Corporation, World Bank. So I welcome you once again, Prasanna, for this webinar come course. And I welcome Dr. Manimele ma'am, the co-organizer of the program, Professor Head, Department of Women's Studies. And I extend a warm welcome to all the participants who have joined so far and also will be joining maybe shortly the other participants. And on behalf of Bharatdasan University, and I request all the members to keep their mic on mute and also not to make any presentation in between, which may interrupt the session. So during the interaction session, you can switch on the mic and you can interact with the resource person. So during the session, please keep your mic in mute. And also another one information that all the sessions which we are doing right now live, they are all recorded and they are available at our website, that is BEC website, which is www.becrusa.in. So people can watch these videos later. If they have missed this session, you can also inform your friends. If they want to watch, they can watch the recorded sessions later. And the test will be conducted on 16 for the course completion certificate. After the test, maybe all the videos will be open to all and anyone can watch it later. So with these words, let me once again welcome all of you, especially the resource person for today. And I hand over the session to Dr. Manimele ma'am, so who will formally introduce the resource person today and carry on the proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Prasanna. So we will begin the session. I think the participants will join. In fact, there was little confusion in the morning. In the earlier invitation, that the two sessions are scheduled for the present. Today's session, and some of them asked, and they could also got the information that it is only today afternoon, and so quite likely that more participants will join. And as far as this, of course, today it is the second international scholar we are going to have in this webinar series, and we have, I have great pleasure in introducing our resource person, Dr. Prasanna Venkatesan, who is our own student here from Bharatdasan Institute of Management, and he had his PhD in economics from Gokhale Institute of Politics, Pune, Politics and Economics, Pune. And more than that, he very much lived in the city, but now he is placed in an International Finance Corporation, World Bank Group, Washington, D.C. So this is an inspiration also. That is one of the reasons why we invited him also. So our own student from this rural Trichy has gone to a top level, and therefore he is an inspiration to everyone. And more so that he is placed in an organization which is dealing with international finance. And he will be talking on the topic international finance perspectives from the gender dimension, which is a very, very important topic of concern in the contemporary context. In fact, we are in the era of international finance, and how far it has been contributing to gender equality, whether women and men corporates owned by men and women are equally accessing to international finance, or men and women are heading the departments, particularly in the finance. India is the best example where many banking and non-banking financial institutions are being headed by women, and also they are proving successfully delivering their duties and excel also. So on the one hand, the women leadership is emerging on the finance corporation side, and the issue is whether it has been reaching this particular international finance in the globalization context, whether it is really benefiting the women and the men or other gender equally, whether financial literacy is the minimum criteria to go and avail the kind of loan from the institutions, whether that is there, leave alone the top informed women, the other sector women, particularly the grassroots women, the micro enterprise, small enterprises. Financial literacy itself is an issue. So, in this context, I'm happy that today we are going to have interaction on this topic. And Dr. Prasanna Venkatesan has been there for 15 years in this field, dealing with the finance and banking sector, and it also his specialization spans across the development finance, international finance, the strategy and financial and economic analysis. And as a financial analyst, which is what he's being, which is what he is designated there in that financial corporation. He handles loan operations of huge amount of $4 billion portfolio, which is very, very huge for the South and East Asian regions. That is very important, as well as global trade liquidity and supply chain interventions. And he also deals with the contributes to multi-currency bond and loan investment operations. And he worked on a strategic project that envisions creating markets and mobilize analytical works, private capital in low-income countries to achieve the sustainable development goals. That is very important. We are now in the sustainable development goals era, and there are various goals to be dealt with. In fact, providing finance and with the gender equity focus has also been emphasized in that particular SDG. And of the 17 SDGs, this gender cuts across all the SDGs, and therefore every SDG should talk about and deal with and integrate gender perspective. So in that context, Dr. Prasanna will be talking on the international finance and gender dimension. And with this small introduction, I invite now Dr. Prasanna Venkatesan to make his presentation. He can go up to say, now it is already 3:50, so 3:50, 55, and then the audience will start their questions, and you can welcome.
Dr. Prasanna, I think you need to unmute your mic.
Oh, yes. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now we can hear.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Prasanna, and thank you, Madam, Dr. Parimangala, Madam, for giving me this opportunity. It's really a great pleasure to come back to our own alma mater to share some of our knowledge after having gained some experience. And thanks again for giving me this opportunity. And good afternoon to everyone. Much of my work over the years has been on the area of international finance. I may not know more in detail about gender issues that you all may be knowing, but nevertheless, I will share whatever I know. Shall I start my presentation here, or I'm trying to? Is my screen visible?
Oh, yes, it's visible.
Thank you. So before I start, maybe if some students are there, maybe someone can just let me know whatever they know about international finance and what they think of the linkage between international finance and gender, so that it will help me get an idea and make this session more interactive. Any student would like to attempt? Okay, maybe then I'll start. So I'm not going to any academic explanation of academic definition of international finance. To make it simple, it's just flow of finance across the border. Finance can flow for various purposes. These are the major purposes. It flows for investments, loans and borrowings. It flows for trade, remittances, aids and grants. So I'm going to explain the major sources for this knowledge sharing session. I'm going to be covering investments, trade and remittances from the perspective of gender issues. Just to give an overview, how does access to finance look like across the world between men and women? If you look at a very simple statistics of account at a financial institution for those who are above 15 years of age, across the world there is definitely a gap between men and women. Specifically in regions such as Latin America, or Middle East and North Africa, South Asia, or even Africa, the gap is quite large. So, for example, in Africa, only 36% of women have access to, or they have an account in a financial institution, whereas 48% men have account. In South Asia, 74% and 64% are by women. The gap is quite large in these three regions. Just to give an overview. In the past 25 years, a significant change happened in the landscape of global financial flows. What is that? So most of us think that globally, when we talk about financial flows, it's only money that moves from government to government or from multilateral institutions like World Bank or other similar agencies to the governments. Let's look at these two graphs. The cumulative movement of finance, the cumulative amounts that moved from the year 1991 to 2005, FDI, the foreign direct investment, was just 1.7 trillion, and the official development assistance, which is the official source of funds, was only 779 billion. But look at the later half of the period, 2006 to 2019, the FDI has grown exponentially. It's almost 8 trillion now, whereas the official development assistance has not grown much. In other words, we observe certain important trends. One is the official sources of finance are declining. Number two, there is exponential growth of private capital flows. And within private capital flows, if you look at the loans, official borrowings are on the decline and private borrowings are on the rise. So for example, earlier, like 20 years ago, you may be observing that Government of India was taking loans from various other official lenders, like either from the World Bank or similar institutions or from other governments. But nowadays, many private institutions, many private companies are taking the loans, and this loan, which in India we call as external commercial borrowings, now occupies the largest share in India's external debt. So in other words, the role of private sector is increasing day by day, and in fact the past 2 decades, the private sector has occupied the center stage of the international financial flows. This is a time series graph of the same data. Look at the orange line, how the official development assistance has progressed. The growth is very meager. On the other hand, look at the private capital flows, the blue line, which is the FDI, direct investments to low and middle income countries. What I'm presenting is the global data to low and middle income countries. It's a phenomenal and exponential growth. So what does it mean to women? How does it connect with gender dimensions? So we are going to see that in the coming slides. Anyone can say how FDI helps developing countries. Of course, FDI has both, FDI, when you say foreign capital, not only FDI, even other forms of capital have both positive effects and negative effects. Anyone would like to attempt what are the positive and negative effects of foreign capital in a developing country? Any student?
So you have to use the expansion for the abbreviations. FDI is foreign direct investments. So many are not from economics background or from commerce background.
Oh, sure, ma'am. Sure, I'll use it. So FDI is foreign direct investments, which is an investment into another any corporate entity in India or in a developing country. In other words, instead of using the word developing country, I would say in a receiving country. ODA stands for Official Development Assistance. So foreign capital helps in certain ways. When a country receives foreign capital, the money is used to invest, used for investment to help domestic growth. Secondly, when there is flow of FDI, there is transfer of knowledge from the capital exporting country. Say, for example, some company, some investor from the United States is investing in India. They don't just invest the money; they also transfer knowledge, technical knowledge. That's quite important. The third one, which is relevant for us for today's topic, is the management strategy and practices. I'm coming to that point as we go further. And human capital. Human capital improves in the receiving country. The receiving country also sees some improvement in the macroeconomic discipline, and foreign capital serves as the source of foreign exchange to the receiving country. And the last point is something important for us today. The capital originating countries, when I say capital originating countries, mostly the rich countries, are generally more equal in gender equality. For example, countries like US or UK or any Western country, any advanced country where the source of finance originates, there gender equality is much better than countries that receive foreign capital. So what happens is there is a spillover effect. We are going to see some graphs on certain literature in connection with this. Any questions so far? Let me show some literature. There was a study by...
Can I raise one question?
Yes, ma'am.
This is when you say that in the countries where it originates more gender equal, can you just substantiate how do you claim that in terms of what you are claiming that it is more equal there in countries where finance is originating rather than the countries where it is receiving?
Yes. Mostly the various parameters with which we measure gender equality, either to access to finance or women's education or women's participation in the labor force. In most parameters, the countries where the per capita GDP is higher, rather the rich countries, fare better than the low income countries. So that is what we say, capital originating countries are generally more equal in gender parameters. Women's freedom is much better in such countries. We are going to see some data, ma'am, in the next graphs, in the next slides. So some studies show there are certain studies which says that FDI improves women's equality and welfare, provided there is a condition. What is the condition? In the country that receives FDI, women should have the mechanism to access resources. Only if just by receiving FDI, women's status would not improve. The country which receives FDI should also create mechanism to enable women to access resources. That's very important. That's what the authors of the authors of this paper say. They are from IMF. In another interesting study by Lee and Shin, they say that based on the survey of attitudes of men and women, women are observed to have been more favorable to FDI. Another interesting observation is here the causality reverses. In the previous two studies, we were seeing that FDI improves women's empowerment or women's equality. On the other hand, the author Brozowski says, women, if the status of women is better, that itself is a factor that attracts more FDI. In other words, there is a reverse causality. And in one study by Asian Development Bank in Cambodia, they observed that FDI increases wages and also probability of women coming into more women coming into labor force. But at the same time, there is no evidence that it helps bridge the wage gap. That's an interesting observation. Some of you might have seen that nowadays there are more CEOs or more senior officials in various corporations and companies. For example, even today, the chief economist of International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the chief economist of the World Bank are women. And the Fortune 500 companies, if you look at the data of Fortune 500 companies and the number of CEOs, the female CEOs, it's growing exponentially. So when such companies, when this kind of phenomenon happens at the international level, there is a spillover effect. That's what we see here as capital originating countries are generally more gender equal. And this creates a spillover effect in countries that receive capital. So globally, we see a trend in increasing participation of women, especially at the senior role. So number of female CEOs is growing exponentially in Fortune 500 companies. This is the data of Fortune 500 companies. Now we look at some data, some interesting data. On the horizontal axis, we see the amount of FDI. This is a sample of about 152 countries in the low and middle income group. And on the vertical axis, we see a score for women's business and law index, this is from World Bank's World Development Indicator. As it's quietly evident, higher the flow of FDI, we see that better is the score on women's ability to participate in business and better institutional mechanism for women in the legal system. Now we come to the next aspect, which is the trade and gender. As we all know, trade is very, very important, or it's an important engine of growth and development. Global trade volume today is about $17 trillion. But how many women do participate in this, such a huge business opportunity? It's widely observed that women do not participate much in international trade. What prevents them? Women face challenges, mainly one in terms of access to finance, number two, access to knowledge. Because men have been in the business for quite a long time, women find it difficult to compete. There is an information asymmetry, what we call is information asymmetry between men and women in accessing knowledge, in accessing resources for international trade. Similarly, access to network. Network is very, very important in international trade. If you're participating in any export or import activity, you need to have connections. That's very, very important. Somehow, women are facing it, finding it difficult to expand their network on this aspect. As a result, women face higher export costs. At the same time, women are employed in several export industries, for example, textiles or gems and jewelries. In many such some of these industries, most employees are women. So when international trade takes a hit due to some cyclical effect, it's women employees who get affected. Same thing for FDI as well. If you look at this chart, between 2003 to 2007 until this 2008 financial crisis, there was an exponential growth of foreign direct investment. After the 2008 financial crisis, there's a fluctuation. There was a sharp decline here again and fluctuation. How does it impact women? In any financial crisis or any economic crisis, it's women who are impacted more than men. So if you're saying that, especially countries like India or any other low income countries that is dependent on foreign capital, if the foreign capital is facing some supply shock, then there is definitely an impact on women more than men. After the 2008 financial crisis, many such studies proved this kind of gender disparity. Before we go to trade finance, anyone can say what is trade finance first? What's your understanding of trade finance? So that I don't make it quite complex. We all know what is trade, right? International trade, export and imports. But to facilitate trade, we need trade finance. So what is trade finance first? We need to understand that. Let's assume somebody from Trichy wants to export some goods. Say, for example, Trichy has certain engineering units, allied engineering units. They want to export to a foreign country. The exporter will get an order, but to manufacture the goods, the exporter needs finance. The exporter will approach the bank. The bank will give some kind of working capital so that the exporter can execute or procure the raw materials, pay to the laborers, and prepare the goods, manufacture the goods. So that is called the pre-shipment credit. And once the exporter ships the goods, the exporter may not get the money immediately. It may take 1 month, 2 months, or 3 months. But till then, the exporter has to run the business. What is the source of income for that? This is when the bank would give what we call as the post-shipment credit. Similarly, sometimes the foreign buyer or seller may ask for a guarantee. Say the foreign buyer may say, okay, today I'm going to give you some advance. What is the guarantee that I pay money to you in advance, but you don't send me the goods? Such situation may come. In fact, this is something that we see in international trade quite often. So the local bank of the exporter will give a guarantee. The guarantee will state that suppose if this exporter does not export as per the terms and conditions, we will pay. We give guarantee to this exporter. So this is another form of support or facility to the trader, exporter. This is guarantee. And there is something called insurance as well. When we ship internationally, the goods may get damaged, or the goods may something or others. There are certain risks when we trade across the world, when the goods are shipped across the world. So we need to take insurance. Some of you may be aware that in India we have this Export Credit Guarantee Corporation. We do have such insurance. Insurance is a very, very important requirement in international trade. Now, studies show that between men and women face challenges in accessing such export credits. It's not that easy for women. But what causes? Do women face the challenges only because they are women? That's an interesting question, and we have a very interesting study for that. So for any questions in understanding what is trade finance? Okay, so I'll go to trade finance is something bank intermediated, like how I said, like guarantees or post or pre-shipment credits or insurance. The general observation is bankers tend to feel that women-owned firms are less creditworthy. Suppose if a male exporter approaches a bank and a female exporter approaches a bank, banks tend to have more confidence on the male exporter. So there is a kind of credit discrimination that happens here. It's not just in India, it's all over the world. So women-owned firms tend to face difficulties in accessing credit. But what are the causes? So the Asian Development Bank conducted a survey, and the results are quite interesting. They found that the survey finds that the rejection rates, when we say rejection rates, the rejection of application for credit by women, it is higher by 10% for women-owned firms than male-owned firms. But there's a good news here. What's the good news? The causes of rejection is not gender. It's simply because women are late entrants into the business. Like, men have been there for quite a long time in international trade. So men have built certain kind of network, certain kind of credit history over a period of time, and knowledge and relationship with the bank. For a bank, relationship is very important. So when a woman comes to the business for the first time, it takes time for the person to build trust and relationship with the bank. So the good news here is that the access to credit, or difficulty in accessing credit, is not based on gender discrimination, but because there is a difference in form characteristics which is influenced by gender. So we will connect all these dots at the end. But at the same time, another observation that this survey found was women-owned firms are less likely to make an attempt to find an alternative source of finance if their first application was rejected. See, for example, today a woman exporter goes to a bank and asks for an export credit for, say, 50 million rupees. If the bank rejects, women don't make a second attempt. That's what the survey says. But at the same time, if a male-owned firm's application is rejected, the owner makes another attempt in approaching another bank or another source. Whereas women, once it's rejected, the probability of making a second attempt is less among women. That's what the survey says. This is a very important lesson, because we will have to educate women exporters to make continuous attempts to find alternative source of finance. And the last one, after this 2008 financial crisis, the dimension or the aspect of international trade and trade finance received attention among the international financial institutions. In fact, trade finance as an area itself has very limited academic research. If some of you want to take further research, trade finance is an interesting area, and not much of research has gone into it. Of course, it's only after 2008 crisis the academic interest on this area academic community started focusing on this area. Since then, the international financial institutions have introduced certain specific financial products to improve trade finance with specific focus on women. So I'm not going into the details of these products. It will be quite complex.